Hello, welcome back. It's Sarah from Roadworthy. So, slightly weird sitch going on. I normally film on Thursday mornings, and I realized I have a sketching event, and I realized with like breakfast, coffee, exercise, all the other things in the morning, I'm not gonna have time to film and make my sketching event. And then I feel like whenever I don't film first thing in the morning, like it turns into a crisis. So I thought, well, why don't I film Wednesday night? And then I thought, the library closes late on Wednesday, so let me go pick up all my holds. So I'm here at the library. And I've completely mismanaged my holds. I have, I don't know, way too many books to pick up. And I don't know how I'm going to read them all. But, you know, that's a problem for another day. So, I actually have 4 books this week to talk about. So let me hop into it. And let me talk about my audiobook first. So while my husband and I were road tripping in Central Oregon, we listened to Red Rabbit by Alex Grecian. This, I think I found as a example of like paranormal horror. And it's definitely got that. So there's like ghosts, ghouls, a were creature, witches, and that is mashed up with a Western, which is kind of what intrigued me. So we have Rose, who is our heroine, and she heads out from Philadelphia to Kansas and marries this man, Joe, you know, through correspondence. He advertises for a bride, and she sort of doesn't really have she sort of is worried she doesn't really have much of a future in Philadelphia. So she agrees to marry this guy. And she goes out into the Kansas prairie and lives with this farmer. He dies. 2 sort of cowboys show up at the house. Sorry, 3. Sort of a white man and a black man, and they were soldiers together during the Civil War. They're wandering around, and they hook up with Tom, who is a witch master, and he's on his way to deal with a witch in Bruton County. And then they've got a little girl who they call Rabbit, because she sort of gets scared and run away, tagging along with them. And Rose decides, well, her husband's died. She's got nothing going on. She's going to join him. And, you know, adventure ensues. And I don't want to give too much away here, but, you know, they encounter strange events, strange creatures. It was initially kind of interesting and kind of fun, that sort of genre mashup. But once you sort of figured out the world, the mechanics of the world, and once you could tell right off, oh, that guy's a ghoul, the book sort of lost its interest for me. Very plot-heavy book. No character development really to speak of. Nothing like that. But it, you know, it kind of did its thing. you know, it was entertaining enough while we were driving on the road. I'll say that for it. I will say, though, there was quite a bit of gore. There were some very sort of like, you know, did that just happen? You know, blood and guts kinds of things. So, a little warning there. While also on the trip, I read Pride and Preston Lynn by Christina Hwang Dudley. And this, as you may be able to tell by the cover, is a Pride and Prejudice retelling. And I picked it up based on the Kirkus review that said, in a world with so many Pride and Prejudice adaptations, a new one has to be truly special to stand out. And this one is. I think I disagree. You know, okay, that's not fair. So we have a Chinese immigrant family, and Lissy is our heroine, and her sister Jenny, and they work at their aunt and uncle's Chinese restaurant, Four Treasures. And, you know, Jenny is the beautiful one. Lissy is the English major in college. You know, and Preston Lynn and his family come into the restaurant, and she serves them a dish that includes shrimp paste. And Preston Lynn's cousin Hannah, or friend, I should say, Hannah has a shellfish allergy and, you know, has an allergic reaction. And he gets all annoyed. That's sort of how they meet. I mean, you know, like every other Pride and Prejudice adaptation, like it's beat for beat, you know, what happens in Pride and Prejudice, you know, it's his buddy is Charlie Bing, is Bingley. I enjoyed the witty banter. That's always a key ingredient in any romance for me. And I really enjoyed the relationship that Lissy had with her roommates and her sister. So, you know, things would happen and, you know, she'd sort of debrief on, you know, what happened and, you know, the latest antic with Preston Lynn and their interpretation of it. And there were definitely some fun and funny conversations, and that piece I enjoyed. The problem that I have with this book is sort of the Wickham storyline. The scandal was Wickham, I shouldn't call him Wickham, but I don't remember his name. So Wickham is Lissy's younger sister's swim coach. And there was a scandal in his past. He had to change, you know, what teams he coached because he had an affair with a married mother of someone on the team. And that felt a little judgy at this day and age. Not that I condone adultery, but like, to me, it was like, that's the big raging scandal. You know, I don't know. It didn't feel that scandalous enough to like warrant like, you know, Lissy, you need to stay clear of him. I don't know. It just kind of didn't work for me. It felt too judgy and Puritan. Um, that was that. I'm sitting here thinking back, like, what else was I reading at that time? I read Heartberries by Therese Marie Mailhot. And she is a indigenous author from the Seabird Island Reserve up in BC. And this I read with Melinda from A Web of Stories as part of our Pacific Northwest Indigenous Authors Project. This is a memoir in essays. And what I found out is I have an original edition, a first edition, I should say, from 2019 that includes an afterword that is an interview between the author and Joan Navyuk King, and an introduction by Sherman Alexie. This interview actually gives a lot of important context to what she was doing in this memoir. And what was interesting is Melinda had a more current version of this book that did not include the afterword. So I was making these comments of, like, for example, the first two essays were really written initially as chapters as part of a fiction book. And so Melinda would be like, what? How did you know that? That explains so much. And I was like, well, I read the interview. And she's like, what interview? Anyway. So apparently it is helpful to get the version with the interview. But this is really talking about her challenges with mental illness, and while sort of divorcing, having custody of her first child taken from her while she's, like, giving birth to her second child, starting a relationship with a white man, and having all these mental health crises. And so these essays aren't told in a linear time frame either. And so it sometimes was hard to understand, when does this essay, the time of this essay, the events that she's talking about, how does that fit in with her hospitalizations, right? Is this just before? Is this just after? It was hard to sometimes piece together how much her mental health was weighing into her recollection of events or her impression of events, So that, I think, makes it a little challenging as a reader. There were definitely a couple of these essays I had to read parts multiple times to try and understand what she was communicating. It can be very experimental in sort of its writing approach. One of the things that she talks about in the interview in the end is really trying to strip out anything extraneous. And there were definitely places in this book where you could really feel that, and it felt really effective. Other spots in this book, it just did not feel like it was working. She talks about being a mother, and I think it was interesting really talking about moments of hating your baby, and she talks about wanting to hurt her baby, and some of these kind of like, whoa. And she gives no justification. Like it's just, her telling it. So in talking about her being a mother and a daughter, talking about her mother, you know.
And then what their version of sexy goth was. And the white lady came up a lot.
I do not know what that conversation was about. I'm looking for a quote in here, and now of course I'm not finding it because I took out all of my flags in order to return the book. But anyway, you know, she's very brutally honest, and you know, she talks about wanting to like lay her shame bare, you know, not sugar-coated, justify it, that there's something incredibly ugly about having shame so barefaced. Melinda talked about, and I agree, that this is a book much more about mental health than about an Indigenous experience. And there are moments where it's really talking about the intersection of mental health and indigeneity that was interesting. But it was a bit of a mixed bag. And again, I felt like her writing sometimes really worked, and I felt like I understood the emotion. She captured that so well. And then other times I was like, what is she trying to say? So a little bit of a mixed bag here, and I think Melinda sort of had the same feeling. Okay, last book, Kids Run the Show by Delphine de Vigan. I want to say Vigan. She is a French author, and this is translated by Alison Anderson. Boy, that's kind of hard to say. Alison Anderson. This is also about kids being the social media stars of their mother's social media empire. And so I very intentionally wanted to read this after reading Allow Me to Introduce Myself. Was that just last week or 2 weeks ago? So I'll go ahead and link that below, just so I'm not like completely having to repeat myself. But this is so in Allow Me to Introduce Myself, we follow a 25-year-old sort of recovering social media star, and sort of what has happened to her and her family once she becomes a young adult and says, I'm not participating in this crap anymore. I'll leave it at that. This is what happens when Kimmy, the daughter, who's 5, is kidnapped. And really the first half of this book is a crime mystery. It's what happened to Kimmy, you know, who took Kimmy, what, you know, where is she, you know. And then kind of the second half, maybe the last third of the book, is sort of the aftermath of that, everybody's sort of response and reaction to that. And then there's another little chunk that's in the future, you know, I think it's 2031, when Kimmy and Sammy, her brother, who's 2 years older, when they're young adults, you know, sort of what does their life look like? Where is everybody now? Kind of a thing. This was not nearly as interesting and successful for me as Allow Me to Introduce Myself. Again, sort of the same kind of themes. You sort of get the rationale of like why their mother does this and how desperate she is for approval and recognition, and sort of does this at the expense of her children. And same thing sort of happens in that they become wildly popular. And again, they've got sponsorship deals. They've got, you know, a product line of kids like stationery and art supply stuff. And so they, you know, they have all of this, you know, the husband quit his job. So the entire family's income is dependent on this YouTube channel and their Instagram and blah, blah, blah. And she's literally filming Instagram stories, like constantly, of these kids. I think they have 2 or 3 YouTube videos a week. And so it's this enormous amount of time that these kids are on film. She scripts things for them. So both books touch on how this is fairly unregulated and it's very much the Wild West compared to the protections that are in place for child actors and child models, which I didn't really think about until I read both of these books. The crime, I should point out too that interspersed between chapters being told by Melanie, the mother's point of view, we have chapters being told by Clara, who is one of the investigators and the police looking for Kimmy. And it is a very conventional sort of crime, you know, police procedural kind of a thing. Nothing really going on. I mean, it is a little surprising who kidnapped her and what's going on there. But there's not a lot of tension, I would say. So as a crime novel, you know, and then the aftermath, you don't get, you get in passing, you know, it would have been interesting to have a story of, okay, Kimmy's, you know, what happens immediately after the crime is solved? What happens to the social media empire? What happens to the relationships in this family? And you kind of don't really get that. You kind of have to wait until the section that's told in 2031 when there's some comments made about, oh, this is what happened in that time period. So I think for me, it was kind of a miss in that a lot of what I think would have been interesting is like, what happened to this family? And you kind of don't really get what happened to the family dynamics. In 2031, you can see what happened to everyone as an individual, but you don't get that immediate after effect. And to me, that felt like a big miss with this book. So those are going back to the library. I'm picking up, like I said, a whole bunch of stuff. What am I reading? I am listening to River East, River West by Aubre Lescure, I want to say. Enjoying that. I'm reading Mizora, Mary E. Bradley Lane. This is, as the subtitle says, an 1880s radical feminist utopia. I read the introduction last night. So I'm guessing as like a story and a work of literature, this won't perhaps be interesting, but it'll be interesting. The introduction made it sound like a lot of the historical concerns of America in the 1880s, you know, Reconstruction, you know, this immediate kind of post-Civil War. Those sort of themes creep in here. So that'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. And I'm wrapping up I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. So that's what I got going on. And then, like I said, I'm going to pick up 50 million books right here and, you know, be pressured to start something else. All right. Thanks for joining me in the car.